Druids built most interesting houses. They were phenomenally interesting. They started off square or something, and they ended up being completely circular. Circle was a sacred shape in the Druidic culture. In fact, the circle was the most sacred shape in the Druidic culture, similar to the cross today. Everything was based on circles. Everything. I've always loved circles. It's very interesting to me. So the house is based on a circle, right? And you walk in, and as soon as you walk in, they said it's a very elaborate dresser. So that's not a dresser, that's a shrine, right? Of course, duh. But they want you to fill the holes in yourself. Look at how they presented this documentary. It's very interesting. They presented just the facts on a very mysterious topic. Right? They didn't jump too far. Even then, the people reviewing still said that they jumped too far. So people are very cautious about over when you're making too many claims. The house. Okay, so we have a circular abode, right? Stones all around the circle, and it's kind of the stones go up to about 3 feet high on the outside, and they're just arranged nicely. The bed's made out of stone, everything's made out of stone. There's a hearth in the middle, square hearth where the fire is. In the center of the circle, there's a square, perfect square, in the center of the perfect circle. And then on either side, there's a bed, and then bed or chamber, bed chamber, it's not a small kind of stone rectangular structure. At the head, there's the shrine, and then there's the dinner place to eat dinner or cook dinner or something off to one of the corners, I think. Or maybe on both sides of that shrine, there's a dinner arranging area. And these had like grass atop them, almost like a hobbit house. Right? These druids like hobbits, living off the land, living with the land. They worshipped nature. Didn't worship nature, they respected nature, and they celebrated nature. And they tried to understand it and study it as their highest vocation in life. Almost like the Indians, right? The Indians now, we have an even more preserved culture of the same Druidic kind of philosophy. They valued virtue over all other kind of form of attainment in life. So it doesn't matter how rich you were, it mattered how humble you were about your riches. That's the chapter I'm on, humility. So I think I'm feeling that the Druidic path and the Native American path are very close, and we don't know that much about the Druidic path, but we do have some archaeological discoveries. I have the feeling that Druidic were much more scientific than the Native Americans, and they had a lot of scientific discoveries. It was all passed down orally, and I think they had an understanding of the spiritual element of the universe, and so they could control it in a way that was mystify the kings. And the kings had them controlling all the big decisions in the society. So the Druids played a huge role here in our ancient society, but it's not very well documented. Like, there's one book that contains all the references to Druids in ancient history, and there's not that many, and you can't piece together anything from it. All you can piece together is this weird religion where they're always doing like sacrifices and stuff, and it's like an obsession with death almost. And so these people just really had a strange insight into the other side, right? And they're from what I can gather, their beliefs are that death is literally just a transition to another world. And they had intimate contact with this other world through what seems to be like shamanic rituals, right? Use of ritual ceremony and meditation and deep concentration and consciousness modulating procedures, such as probably drugs and things like that, to connect with this other side. And so they structured their entire society around that idea of the circle and the holistic whole of one side and the other side. And so a lot of these, and all about the Druids, are the circle tree grove. The grove is in order to do the ceremonies, the group ceremonies, and things like that. So that is a very important part of even modern Druidry. So one of the circular, I'm going to get back to the house in a second, but one of the circular groves, for example, large grove, stones all around the outside, and then a upside down large, huge oak tree trunk upside down, and it was taken, cut down, or whatever, however it was removed from the earth, right in during spring. So right when it was in full blossom, they took it and turned it upside down, put it in the earth, and the historian that was giving the documentary thought that his theory was that it was an offering to the other world, right? The other world was viewed as inside the earth, the inner earth, right? And that tree, they did a visualization to show that tree, like what it would look like growing inside the ground. So they thought that the circle, instead of having the roots in the ground, they put the crown in the ground to put energy back into the earth. So they did all these things on these circular shrines, right? And the historians didn't know why they were doing it, but they were probably ley lines. And if you analyze where those things are positioned on the earth, they probably coordinate very well with the ley lines of the earth that have been charted by various people, for different ancient cultures and things like that. We have different types of charts now that look over the ley lines and things like that. And so that's extremely interesting. But what the real thing was with the houses, right? So in order to understand their full view of death and of living and of their culture, right? Well, we can't really understand it because not much is known, but the historians gave me a lot of data yesterday, so now this is a third-hand account, right? They have a second-hand account of things that they found. Now they do limited theorizing because they have to be official, and now I'm going to do the far-out theorizing. And based on what I've read about modern Druidism and their roots and their philosophies and their viewpoints and stuff like that. And modern Druids do not claim to be based in ancient Druidism. They're like, look, most of it's lost, but we've been doing our own spiritual practices and having a lot of smart people contribute to this, and we find that it's very good. And that's what modern Druidism is. And so they're not too concerned about the past, right? But I'm concerned about both. I like the stuff that they've made, the recent stuff that they've made, and I'm also curious about what these ancient Druids were all about. They're kind of mysterious, and they interest me for that reason. And so these houses that they lived in were circular, like hobbit houses covered in grass, and they were made of stone on the outside, cut very nicely, not like crazy nice like the Egyptians, but the tombs that they made were of Egyptian quality, and they looked the exact same. They had tunnels going in, you had to crouch down, there was a chamber on the inside, and it was the burial chamber. And what they discovered was that the burial chamber was actually just the person's house. So say, you and your wife lived in a house, right, and when you guys passed to the other side, right, that was probably almost celebrated, then that house was turned into almost like a shrine to like your grave, right? And so that hearth was where I think that body was burned, and then they put and then eventually the house would cave in, and the remnants would kind of eventually wash away, and then they would circle in that house with stones. The ancestors would circle in, descendants would circle in the house with stones. Large stones were on the outside, and eventually, this is the theory from the video, right? This might not be the exact procedure, and eventually those stones would get moved in to create a actual like meditation chamber, like where you could be with your ancestors, right? And eventually, an entire structure got built outside of that, like a tomb, like a circular type of smaller chamber just around that center hearth, right, where the body was burned and where the soul, the essence, was thought to have been kept when the person was alive, because that's the center, that's the fire, that's the life force of this individual. And so once that happens, that this becomes a spiritual chamber for everyone in the family to travel within on special days, because it was lined up perfectly with the winter solstice, the winter death, the deathest day of the winter, right? The solstice itself, the least life-giving day of all. Now, the summer solstice would be the most life-giving day of all, and the spring solstice would also be an interesting transition. And so we have here a structure that's perfectly aligned with lunar and cosmological cycles, just like the Egyptians, and very precisely engineered, just like the Egyptians, but obsessed with circles, unlike the Egyptians, and theoretically were around during the times of the Egyptians. So that's interesting. What else? And so inside these chambers, what happened? It's unclear, but it looks like a small replica of the house, right? So these historians were theorizing that the inside the chamber actually was meant to be a house for the spirit, like in the other world, right? And that's why it's dark and closed. And I think my theory now, the third party theory, is that these people would go perform rituals inside these houses and then have ceremonies. Um, and it just got darker, didn't it? It's strange. And these ceremonies would connect them with their ancestors, and through various use of shamanic rituals and drugs and consciousness modulating procedures in a group, right? You would actually consult with your ancestors and gain from their wisdom because they invested their energy in that space and in that life, entire space. And somehow or another, maybe it's a true portal, maybe it's not. Maybe they actually did discover the portal to another world. I don't know. It's that part is very unclear. But what they were doing was something special, right? And everybody recognized in their society that they were able to do this special something because of the knowledge that they had. And so that's what makes Druids interesting enough for me to study them and to try to understand their culture and to understand and particularly in context of these theories that I've been building, because it was the Druidic kind of symbolism that led to a lot of my discoveries. So that's out of respect for them, I'm going to try to give them the time of day and give them an academic inquiry here, even though I'm not a historian, but I'm interested in history. Be right back. So while we're talking about this, we'll leave the houses for one moment. We can come back to that. But now I want to tell you a little bit about what really happened. So what happened to the Druids, right? So what? All right, why don't we have any documentation of them? Why are they so mysterious? And why aren't there like any more, historical records of them surviving them? And what happened to them as a race? Well, what happened? Caesar had them well documented as kind of they've always been known as the general decision makers in the society. Any dispute, any serious dispute, was taken to the Druids for them to decide. They were the judges. They were very learned men, very wise sages almost. The oracles of a society. It would seem, based on the accounts in the texts that I've read, the first-hand accounts. Right. So now this is my second-hand account of those texts because these are first-hand texts in Latin translated. So the translation could be considered a second-hand account, but no, it's a first-hand account. So from that, we read that the Druids had a very important place in society, and they did a lot of things related to sacrifice. It's unclear if the sacrifice was determined by them, or some relationship with their gods, or some other person or force was compelling them to do the sacrifices. Personally, I would hope that they're not doing the sacrifices out of ignorance of life, because I'm trying to understand this as a path to understanding, right? And it would not seem that human sacrifice or any other type of sacrifice is a way to do that, but I'm not sure because I don't understand their religion, so I can't pass judgment and I can't decide anything for fact, right, yet, until I get more information on why they were doing these sacrifices or what role these sacrifices really played or what they were actually, what they really were. And so that's interesting. But anyways, what happened to these Druids? The Romans wiped them out all at once. Literally, they gathered them all up and slaughtered them because they were afraid of something. It's like a genocide. It was literally a genocide. And I think what probably happened was that the magic that the Druids were controlling, whatever magic was, got out of hand. Meaning that it was threatening the power of the Romans, and too many people were following or investigating this occult faith of magic and of natural understanding, natural philosophy. Because these Druids, it would seem, they're not warriors. They are learned men. But it also said that the Druids, this is how they elected their leader. The leader was a what one of the elders, right? One of the elders kind of took the position automatically, or sometimes there was a fight, a violent fight. What? Weird, weird, really? These learned men fought to be the leader. It's interesting. Just literally just like a fist fight or some kind of violent act towards each other. Some competition, like a martial arts type thing or something. Like total Zen style. Weird, right? This culture is intriguing for many different reasons. It's strange. They're enlightened, but then they're barbaric at the same time. It's like they've somehow harnessed that beast or unleashed the beast or something. I don't know what they did. It's weird. But they were obsessed with circles. They built these really interesting houses. And the Romans wanted them dead. The Romans killed them off. And in the passage, the original passage, it said that the Druids raised their hands up in the battlefield, and it stupefied the Roman warriors, because there was women and children on the battlefield fighting, doing this magical enchanting with the warriors. There was not that many Druidic warriors to begin with, and there was the women and children there, and it was like the warriors didn't know what to do. They stopped. Their limbs were paralyzed. And then they were open to attack, apparently. And the Druids, it seemed as if the Druids had this power, right? But then the Romans just slaughtered them anyways. And either... What I can't understand, though, is if they had this power with nature, if magic was real at somehow or another, right? If they did control it, because why else would the kings be afraid of them? Unless they were tricksters and they were masters of illusion, right? Which was also possible. But if they did have this connection, then why did they just all get wiped out there? Why didn't they, like... Because there's other accounts of, Druids controlling forces of nature, like lightning storms and, other things like that. Why didn't they just, have a lightning storm on these guys or something like that? It's a mystery. But anyhow, tons of them were killed there. And they never recorded their philosophy, they never wrote it down. It was all an oral tradition because they valued memory as one of their virtues. Memory was one of the most important things of their society, so that's why they had oral tradition. So they told stories just like the Native Americans. That's why the two have a strong link in my mind, because story is their culture engine. It's their collective wisdom, their knowledge bank of how to behave. Instead of having a Bible that's in stone and ugly and people argue over it, everything was oral, and you talked about it, and you shared around a campfire, and you laughed, and it was known that the tales were made bigger and bigger every time that they were told, because that's how stories are. One big fish, right? And so those are the traditions that we need to revive. Storytelling around the campfire, right? But through technology, we have been telling stories. Reddit is a storytelling platform. You actually get people interesting stories. It's a story bank on Reddit, right? So if we take that Reddit database and we somehow make it interactive and we bring it out to the world for people to tell their stories, and you get the snickering and you get the snoodling, right? But you also get those valuable gems that get voted up and percolate up through the masses to share the wisdom. I've learned literally so much on that website Reddit, and I've laughed so much from cat videos too. It's a blast. So I want to structure this new storytelling platform like that so that everybody will enjoy it, right? Because obviously the solution is not going to come from schools, because it takes too long to put anything through there. Right? It's got to come from a fun game that people do of their own volition. It's got to be magic, right? People have to get into it. But it's not going to be about magic. It's going to be about creativity. And creativity is going to be the new magic, because creativity will make you magic. It'll make you be able to make anything. Be a computer scientist, and you're going to be a computer scientist with it. But anyhow, these Druids, they're circular houses. It's cycle. Right? It was a circle, it's a square in the middle, and then the circle imploded, right, because the person died and became a remnant, a memory of that person, and then the ancestors came and recreated the outside circle, and then sometime later moved some of those things in and created an inner shrine, right? That was like a chamber, and that you could go in and transport to this other world. And then now there was a whole cycle, right? So this monad, this one single circular monad became a connection with the other world. And it was a sphere. It wasn't just a half circle. Half of it was underground the entire time. And it's as if at the time of death, it just transitioned. That part that was always underneath just came on top, and the top went to the bottom. And the other person just lived in the other world, and they would just come back up during those ceremonies or something like that, right? And so they were able to make that connection, or somehow thought that that connection was real, so they valued it in their society, right? So since whether or not it's real is it doesn't matter, right? What matters is that they valued it in their society. We have to understand why they valued it and what that meant to them, right? As good ethnographers, as good anthropologists, cultural, archaeological anthropologists or whatever. So, okay. Now the next interesting thing is Stonehenge. So they thought that Stonehenge was made by the Druids, right? And I've seen conflicting reports on the internet about the origins of Stonehenge, and so we don't know exactly. But it appears as if it's Druidic because it's circular, right? Of course. And so everything was about circles for the Druids. And Stonehenge was paired with another thing called Woodhenge, all right? And I haven't heard about Woodhenge before. And it was actually, there's a trail from Woodhenge to Stonehenge, right? And so what they thought would happen is that Stonehenge was the place for the dead, and Woodhenge was the place for living. Wood is alive, it's vibrant, there's festivals here, and then there's a procession to Stonehenge, and everybody takes this trip, this journey, but there's no remains of Stonehenge. So they said, well, maybe it was just the journey for the dead, right? The spirits go, well, that's not just the journey for the dead. Everybody parties and literally engages in shamanic ritual and ceremony to get really messed up, I think. This is my theory, right? And engages in all kinds of interesting orgies and festival activities over here to celebrate life, and then takes the trip to the other world. And through their psychological processes of journeying to this other world in their mind, right, they get to Stonehenge, and it's through the water. They have to go down this water, have a guide path, have a guide going there with them, and it's going to be this whole spiritual journey for like a pilgrimage, right? And they're under the influence of different potions and spells and whatever, and they've danced and they've had feasts and they've made love and they've done all these things, right? And then they go down the river to Stonehenge to perform the final acts, right, of transition. And so they go there and then they meditate and they open up the portal, and they welcome the guests into the new world, right? So they introduce them and they kind of get them there, and that makes all their souls right with the death, right? It harmonizes them, and it glorifies the death and crystallizes it as the beautiful thing that it was, right? And so that's a very interesting view of death, and they had their entire society structured around it, and the death were venerated as a part of the culture, right? What they left behind, the tools, the knowledge and wisdom that they imparted, is helping everybody live better, right? So why not try to just venerate them and intertwine them in our society, and enshrine them in respect and grace, rather than shoving them in a cemetery somewhere that gets bigger and bigger, that just looks scary, right? So the dead were all around these people because it was their spirit that was guiding the whole society to begin with, and then you would remember those people and raise them up, just like in the Native American culture. The Native American culture also really honored their dead and tried to embody the spiritual teachings of the various smart medicine men, shaman men, warrior men in the society. And so again, you have battle and understanding and wisdom being linked, just like you do in the Chinese society of like Zen and Buddhism and martial arts and things like that. So we do see this link between calm peacefulness and warrior mentality, and a disregard for death, right? For these Druids especially, a non-caring of death, because there was no fear of death. They said that on the battlefield, these Druids were just remarkable because they literally didn't fear death in the least, and so they would do just the most insane acrobatic things because there was no regard for whether or not it would endanger their life. It just needed to be done. And so that's a very interesting philosophy. Why are you raining on me right now? To get up. Move around. So it's a very interesting philosophy for those particular reasons. And the homes are the key, right? This circular structure that represents a cycle, represents a symbiotic relationship, and rhythms over time that span through time but that connect time. It's the thread. The human culture and history is the thread that connects, that weaves together the fabric of space-time. Culture is the thread that weaves together space-time. Culture, human history, our collective consciousness changes the fabric of space-time. It warps it, right? And that's the probability distribution of future events. And so that's something that Einstein wasn't looking at in particular, and we've now identified as an important component to consider in these investigations of perception, cognition, creativity, AI, all these things, right? So while Einstein was caught up on physical energy and what he saw in reality in terms of propulsion and kinetics and right planetary motion and all the energy that you see out in the world, we're also concerned with culture, experience, knowledge, language, philosophy, what all those things mean for human understanding and understanding those things out in the physical world. Because we have tools and technologies and crafts and theories that help guide our explorations in science. And those are the things that allowed Einstein to make those discoveries to begin with. But those aren't accounted for in Einstein's theory. It's not a unified theory of the world, right? Because humans are in this world. And his theory definitely doesn't explain psychology. But the Druids had one natural philosophy that explained both the physics of the world and the spirituality of the world in life and death and what it meant to live and to live a harmonious life. And so they were onto something slightly different than modern science. And I want to investigate deeper, and I want to try to revive that further than the Druidic revival movement has done, because these guys, while they're good intentioned and while they're quite magical and special in their readings, you can tell, especially this John Michael Greer character, he's very nice, right? They don't understand quite how to reach the modern youth generation, but I have a better idea of how to do that, and so I'm going to go ahead and try to do that through these videos and through a collective effort at making a set of technology that's exciting, fun, and easy to use, and helps kids learn about this type of stuff. Just magic, personal science, understanding the world, being a natural philosopher, Druidry, our history, unknown, forgotten human history, our roots, nature, all these things, being nice, being a good person, what it means to be harmonious. And through these games and through these technological explorations, I hope to impart seeds that will help transform our society for the better. And that's the ultimate goal of this project here.